Hey, what's up, everybody? Killing for Company. My name is Kellen, and this is a special episode to the Cut Your Teeth series. Today, I have Brian Arkham here with us. So, we're going to talk about a couple of albums from the 2000s, or really the end of the 90s, I guess, and go through our thoughts and kind of pick Brian's brain on the subject. For those who don't know, Cut Your Teeth was a 2000s death metal series that I did around this time last year. There were 4 different episodes over the course of the summer that I put together, and I kind of wanted to include someone else in the conversation. I knew Brian was the right person for the job, so
We'll see.
I reached out to Brian, and what the concept for this sort of series will be is I sent him 3 CDs from my collection, and in return, I asked that Brian send me 3 of his. All are surrounding death metal from this era, and we would just kind of compare notes. So the idea being, not only would I get a chance to kind of go over these topics with someone else, but also I get a chance to look at someone else's collection and see, if it was something I wanted to add eventually. I'm going to send Brian's CDs back to him.
Yes.
But it's also a chance to sort of explore someone else's collection and kind of get their thoughts and their experience with it now, decades potentially since they first picked it up. And so Brian sent me 3. I sent him 3. And today we're going to go over, we picked just for this episode, we have 1 each that we'll go over. And before we gonna get into the albums, though, I wanted to talk to Brian about this topic, generally speaking. So, I guess the first thing I'll ask you is, when you think of 2000s death metal, I know you're a fan of the genre broadly. We share a lot of interests outside of death metal, but within the genre, I know you're a fan of the 80s, 90s stuff. You're also picking up new releases. So when I say something like 2000s death metal, what comes to mind to you?
Well, it especially when you did the first episode of Cut Your Teeth and was talking about the subject, it took me back to a time period where a lot of a lot of a lot of the, I would call them, like, legacy bands that I was into, especially like Suffocation, Obituary, were kind of on hiatus. They had done, put a pause on for, and they would come back later. But in that time period, um, there was kind of a void, I would say. And some of the other bands like Deicide, Morbid Angel, maybe they weren't putting out their strongest material. And it seemed like there was also, well, the rise of the internet was happening right there too. I mean, if we talk about, late '90s, early 2000s, that's kind of where it all begins as far as how it impacts music in general. Um, so I think the whole kind of genre itself was maybe adapting or changing at that point in time. I personally kind of went through some, um, exploration, I guess you would call it. I got into a little bit of that metalcore that was popular, like Shadows Fall and Killswitch Engage and Lamb of God. Um, and even later, I got really into bands like Opeth and Catatonia when they put out their 2001 albums, Blackwater Park and Last Sphere Gone Down, those two especially. But as far as death metal goes, there are still a lot of really, really cool acts coming up. Um, Newer, I would say, like Nile was a big one for me. Origin, um, but it was interesting because it was um, it was different how you discovered it. Before it was like Headbangers Ball or Metal Maniacs or a couple other publications that I could find in the Midwest where I lived. Now we had stuff like Napster, stuff like um, internet message boards.
Right.
So so this in particular, this concept was you showed a ton of bands that I was not aware of, stuff that I missed. It seems like a lot of the stuff that I was exposed to was specific to a certain region or a certain record label. Not all, but as I was looking kind of through the ones that I revisited after seeing your first Cut Your Teeth episode, a lot of them are the same record label, same kind of general geographical area.
Is that for would you say the Midwest for you? Is that
No, no. In fact, it was a ton of California bands.
okay?
Unique Leader.
Yeah,
That's
that
the one, and that's just the one I was exposed to. And they would have. Um, I don't know. I don't even remember where exactly I would. I think it was just reading reviews,
right.
maybe. And they advertised a lot, so they'd have um, and their album covers were always really cool. No matter who which band it was. Yeah.
Right, and I it's one of those things when I um, think about and like really important labels, right? Like obviously, Deeds of Flesh comes into you
Yeah.
know that era as like an incredibly important band, but
Yeah.
then to have sort of band recognition along with a label to sort of galvanize an entire sort of direction within the genre.
Yeah.
Um, were you into death metal prior? Like when is your like point of entry historically to the genre?
It was at least if we're talking about years, it would have been 1993,
Oh wow, okay.
I believe, maybe even 92. I know it was it was death metal at least was like seventh, eighth grade, so that would have been like 91, 92. But I had a cousin who introduced me to Deicide's Legion.
I remember you telling this story.
Yeah, bringing the Spawn and Masters on the seventh day. God created Master. So those three were like my introduction. Um, and then I found Obituary, and I really love it. I've always loved Obituary because they're one of those easy to get into death metal bands. And then Cannibal Corpse and the Earache bands and Morbid Angels. So it was definitely. I would point to like 93 where I was like, yes, this is the kind of music I like. And
Uh,
that's where I would go. But the thing was, where I lived in the Midwest.
you were in Illinois here, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I was in Illinois, like Central Illinois, Springfield, Illinois. We had a Best Buy, and we had a couple of music stores at the mall. Um, chain stores. There might have been I mean, I'm sure there was like a local record, like a mom and pop type place, but I was new to driving, so I pretty much just drove to where I knew I could get to and from. I wasn't like going into the city or anything like that. I'm staying like out by the mall, where it's safe.
Sure,
And
sure.
so it was, yeah, I wasn't doing, it was a long time later that I did any type of mail order. So it's just whatever they had on the shelves, I would check out.
So that kind of gets into the next sort of question I have for you is, and you briefly touched on it, is where how like where were you hearing about death metal bands? Is it did you have a friend group? Was there a record store? I mean, I know you talked about this is essentially the turn. I mean, I don't know what it was like with you in terms of growing up with computers, but in my to my memory, the sort of the end of the '90s is when our modem became something resembling, you know, something you could use, a bit more recreationally without it being a hassle. So,
Right.
um, and that went along with, you know, the Napster era and just, access to information, everything that goes along with it.
Yep.
Uh, so at the same time, I'm also that was very new. And I think finding trusted sources online, back then, it wasn't like there was a large infrastructure that had over the decades sort of built up
Right.
reputation. So,
There
uh,
was no metal archives yet, at
right, right.
least that I knew of. Maybe there was a start of one. I'm not exactly sure when they started, but it was not somewhere where I was going for information. Um, that would come a little later.
So when you were
But
like, where did you pair of bands from? New York, Unique Leader, for
yeah,
example, from magazines, or where were you getting it from?
I'm pretty sure it was internet message boards. Specifically, there was one for a Canadian magazine called Brave Words. Maybe it was called Brave Words and Bloody Knuckles, the magazine. But I remember I was frequently checking that, and people would post a lot about um, new death metal. And this is yeah. So in the year 2000, I started college, and that was when I had my first. Our dorms were all Ethernet. We had Ethernet access, so that's when it really changed to where you could get it. I mean, it was the fastest internet I had ever experienced. You know, I still did not have a computer with a CD burner yet.
Oh wow, okay.
So that would come like maybe a year and a half later. But at least I could, I remember a lot of review sites were popping up. There was not, when I say there wasn't a metal archives, but I did find um, some type of website that would have album covers and track listings. So this is also Napster was coming along. Napster, LimeWire, SoulSeek later, a couple others, um, where you could go and pretty much you'd have to track down albums track by track. If you put in the name, it would spit out, you know,
Right,
a ton of, well, not even, I mean, it's not like it was now. I mean, it's not like it is now where
sure,
you get everything. It
sure.
was, you'd have to
Entire
like,
discography.
put it together as a puzzle piece,
Right,
right?
right.
You'd have to know what the track listing is and then go find those songs one by one. And then, yeah, so it was MP3 format. And eventually I did get a CD burner and started buying blank CDs and making my own. And I was still, I was always into CDs. But at that point, I pretty much got rid of all my tapes, CDs. I was never into vinyl until recently. It was always CDs for me. And then, um, yeah, so I was still, I was a college kid. I had some money coming in from the military because I was in the army for a few years before that. So I didn't really have to work, but I also didn't have a lot of expendable income. So there was a local record store um, that tended to um, get in a lot of European titles. Like when I talked about Opeth, they had that. They had some Opeth. They had Catatonia, um, In Flames. I'm trying to think of some of the others. A lot of some Therion. In the Emperor, I remember they had some Emperor. Um, but they were like imports, so they were a little more expensive. So um, every few weeks I go by there and pick something up. Um, but once I started getting better at putting together full MP3 albums of bands that I would hear about on these random message boards, I pretty much stopped buying CDs for a good while,
Right,
and just I would just burn CDRs and
right.
I would trade them with my friend. I did have some friends that were into death metal and the more extreme stuff, and we would go to a lot of shows in St. Louis because it was kind of the closest place. Um,
Okay.
yeah, but So yeah, we were trading. We would trade MP3 files and burn them on when you could not just make a CDR, but make an MP3 CD where you
Right,
could put
right.
like I don't know 12 different folders on it, and trade it back and forth.
It's that was definitely the CD era, and it's funny
Yeah,
now, like, collecting it, um, a lot of it never made it to vinyl, so it didn't
true.
get sort of repressed, and it's an interesting sort of now in a moment where going back and grabbing vinyl records, it's a particular era of death metal that it only got CD sort of,
Yeah,
releases.
yeah, it was way. I mean, it was years before the vinyl resurgence,
Right,
or it was because I guess the everybody was downloading music.
right,
Um, it was Lars Ulrich might have had. Maybe he was right, but it did change things. It did make it
right,
easier to. I mean, I don't know. Without that, if I would have heard of 75% of these bands, if my local shop in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, didn't 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 have that Opeth record, um, I mean, it would have been years before I'd probably heard it. It just got lucky, like, and she wasn't keeping unique leader stuff around. I had to find that. I came across that on my own. I'm pretty sure it's Deeds of Flesh with the this one. Actually pulled it out. Um, Path of the Weakening. That was the first one I
oh
heard.
yeah, for sure.
Um, I think this is 2000. It might be 99 actually. So this is really early on.
Yeah, I wanna say it's around 2000.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I became a big Deeds of Flesh fan, and so just kind of dug into that label and some of the other really cool releases they had. And not only from there were a lot of bands from California like Vile and um, Inherent Disease. That was another one I was into. But the bands from Australia, also Poland, of course. So yeah,
so and that's a great segue into the next question. So, because were starting you were collecting earlier, you know,
yep,
you'd started to listen to death metal because this is really where I begin.
okay, yeah,
Um, I 93, 94, 95. I was still in elementary school. This is a little bit it's some heavy lifting for me at that age. I
yeah, definitely.
so later on, did you feel from someone who was spending time listening to death metal records in a lot of what would be kind of like I don't know if you want to consider the peak time period and kind of when 90s death metal to some degree is kind of on its way out from what would say its most formative years at the beginning of the 90s, 91, 92, so to like around
Yep.
that time period. Like, did you feel when you're picking up those releases or listening to those MP3s, etc., that there was decidedly something different going on within the genre? I think now when people will sort of casually refer to 90s death metal, and there's like an understanding of, okay, this is the sound we're going for. But as we sort of end the decade and move towards the 2000s, like just personally speaking, when I think about that time period, it felt just like a continuation, right? It did not feel like there was a reflexive attempt to try to move away from that sound. It was like
Yep.
a band that was just trying to build off of the other sort of
Yep.
incrementally.
Yep.
It didn't feel like there was a hard line that had sort of been drawn. When for you, do you remember it that way? Did you feel altogether like there is something that death metal has let go of its roots and is doing something completely different now, or how do you think about that?
Um, so I was really big into the Floridian scene when I first started getting into this. I talked about Cannibal Corpse, Deicide earlier, and Obituary, and Malevolent Creation, and I mean, they had that Morrisound '90s, production. It was thick, um, but I think when a band like Nile came along, on Relapse Records, they started doing things a little differently. It's a little more technical, um, a little more, I don't want to say polished, but it seems like they started going in this more, um, I don't know even know how to. The only I don't want to say it's like virtuos, virtuoso,
Right.
you know. But it's, the Gorguts, the last two Gorgut, not the last two, but From Wisdom to Hate and Obscura, I think were big influences on this next chapter also, because
Right.
they also got a little more progressive. But bands like, but they weren't going to into like the 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 brutal like slam type stuff like that. Stuff like Internal Bleeding or maybe earlier Suffocation was going for. I feel like Pierced from Within was another kind of pinnacle album that kind of maybe paved the way for this new wave, even though that was like '95.
Right.
Um, where it was it had more. Cryptopsy is another one that I think came
Right.
along. That was a big one. It's hard to describe. Like it's like controlled chaos, maybe. You know, but it sounded good. It wasn't like like that incantation type, dirty, ugly, muddy production, which is great and which is kind of seen a resurgence here.
Right.
In the recent times, um, it was just seemed a little more polished. But even later, still, you would get stuff like that was even more polished, like stuff that you probably wouldn't be able to play live that great. Where it's like it's like cut and pasted.
Right.
At
Right.
least this stuff,
Right.
at least Deeds of Flesh, you would think to be up there and play it live.
Yeah. I totally
Right.
agree in the sense, like, trying if you look at the primary influences, especially, like, we're kinda speaking casually and to some degree, like, trying to avoid all the derogatory associations of the
Yeah.
decade, but I think they're real, right? Because you and I both remember what happened circa, you talk about, like, the incantation
Mhm.
revival, like,
Yep.
when that end, like, 2008, 9, 10, I remember hearing the, first the full title escapes me at the moment, but Dead Congregation's first full length, I think it's 2008,
Graves
and
of
it
the
just
Archangels or something like
yeah,
that.
there you go. And it just was completely right, like, it was this new turn, and there's not just the singular record, that did that, but it did was a deep point of demarcation, right? Like, the whole genre had started to shift away from something that you and I are kind of pointing towards,
Yeah.
right? Is it was bands who were inspired by Cryptopsy and Suffocation and Deeds of Flesh,
Yeah.
probably to some degree, like they wanted the speed and aggression of Deicide and Morbid Angel, right? Like
Mhm.
those are
Yep.
the primary influences when I think about the Gorguts is another one, but Obscura spawned an entire band, right?
Right.
Uh, but where I think now it's Incantation, Autopsy, Entombed, you know, uh, those bands who are maybe Bolt Thrower is another good one.
Yep.
Um, it's a different kind of sound, right? It's a whole different kind of like riff structure.
Yes. It's a little less loose and kind of freewheeling. Um, it's definitely got more punch to it as far as production wise, and I mean just the musicianship
Right,
is really at a whole nother level.
right.
It seems like not the other stuff isn't great too. It's just this is
Sure.
when you I think even on one of your first episodes trying to define this was kind of trying to make it label it as it's brutal technical death metal. you
Right.
know it's not really pro- progressive. clean type of death metal. It's still got a little dirt and grime on it,
Right.
you know.
And I think that for me, going past, going into this decade, um, I want to say like the bar continued to, they kept on pushing to a level that it got to a point where uh, it started had very little impact, right? It's like a law of
Yes,
diminishing returns, right? Like
exactly.
they were going, it was so over the top.
Yep.
How much do I actually enjoy this? Versus how much am I here just to sort of witness the craziness on display?
Right, the insanity, and that's why I think a lot of this stuff has kind of just sat on my shelves, or even not on my shelves. Like a lot of the stuff I had, I still had CDRs of. Even the stuff that I sent you,
Right.
I only acquired after you're watching your video, and I was like, I got to find this stuff. I need to have it. It's stuff that you don't. I didn't really go back to that often, but until your series kind of triggered that,
Right.
and then I jumped back in full force.
And then I mean, I don't know what your impression is, but it's also like a time period where death metal wasn't really cool. Like, I guess
Yeah,
that's
no, exactly.
it's I'm incredibly nostalgic thinking of it
Yep,
because I'm, in my teens, early 20s, and that's such a formative period in anyone's
yep.
sort of musical life. But, um, and then in that regard, I think it doesn't get talked about too often. So when I was like, "Oh, Brian would be down for this," I kinda was excited to have someone else instead of me screaming into the void, uh, to talk about this kinda stuff. Because I think for both of us now, we have a little bit more, like, death metal exposure in terms of having more appreciation for something that happened beyond our generation. Um,
Right.
and then how does that play into the music that to some degree defined our, you know, adolescence and young adulthood?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's kind of what we're up against is the older generation is not going to, it's they're going to say like, hey, the drums got all triggered. I got
Tricky. Yep.
big squeals going on. Everyone just
Yeah.
sweet picking all over the place. Like, I feel those are
Yeah.
the negative things that people say.
Right. And even me to some extent would say, yeah, some of this doesn't really. I mean, that early death metal had riffs and stuff and songs you could sink your teeth into, and grab hold of this stuff. This stuff you got to listen to it a lot to really let it sink in. Especially stuff like Origin or Deeds of Flesh. I mean, a lot of it sounds the same unless I like to listen with headphones. I feel like I get a better experience with
Right.
headphones or earbuds, and this music especially. If I'm listening to it in the car, there's a lot of outside noise, um, you know, kind of distracting you from all the nuances and all of the minutia that's in there. That's really important to the music.
I mean, and we've kind of touched on like the technical aspect of this, but I think what I wanted to do was also like I know some. Have you had a chance to listen to all the CDs I gave you?
Yes,
Okay,
but I spend the most with.
because I think like what I hope that people get out of this is a level of like negotiation. Like everything that I assumed this was, there's potentially room for opportunity here,
Yeah,
and a decade for to potentially discover a band or one or two per se that exists that's worthy of consideration outside of the major names, right? Like I understand if you like Swedish death metal, you're going to listen to Bloodbath, like I get it,
yeah,
but there was a whole lot more that happened during that time period that um, wasn't sort of over the top virtuoso death metal that probably is worthy of your time. Um, the two that we picked here today, which we're going to get into next, is I kind of want to get into the choices. So,
yeah.
um, if you want to, I got a few notes for the one that you gave me, but since you are the guest of honor, um, do you want to go first? I
Yeah.
was
Were we talking about yours?
Yeah, yeah. So the
Yours
one that I
first?
took away, I'll let you kind of talk about it. And initially, if you guys kind of want to go over, first impressions and what your thoughts are.
Anata, Swedish technical death metal, the infernal depths of hatred. See, I believe this is '98. So when you gave me this, I was like, oh, a real. This is an early one. And I knew this name, but I had never really dove into them at all. I knew of them, just had never listened to them. So um, yeah, and when Swedish death metal, it does have a little bit of that kind of Gothenburg melody in here, but it's it's definitely not the focal point. I would say um, there is a lot of just really mean, nasty riffs going on. The vocals are they got kind of one of those dual vocal approaches, the deep growls and then kind of the raspy, almost black metal type. Jesus, sorry. Digipacks, right? But the melodic parts, especially now the two songs that really stood out to me, "Let the Heavens Hate" and "Under Azure Skies," tracks 2 and 3. Immediately, I heard or it reminded me of early In Flames, like Lunar Strain, Subterranean, that stuff where before they got too melodic, I would say, just kind of that tremolo type melody going through it. Those two songs are really, really good. But like I said, this is not your typical like at the gates, Dark Tranquility, In Flames soul work. This is something different. It definitely has that technicality. There's also there's also a little bit of like where they slow down and get the clean guitar or acoustic guitar kind of undertones. Those parts were really enjoyable. It's a band I kind of kick myself for skipping out on them for so long because this is really good. So I'm glad you recommended it.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
I started to get into their subsequent albums, but um, yeah, this one's really cool.
I'm glad you mentioned the melodic part. I totally agree there. Um, Especially because I was listening to this by comparison to the one you gave me,
Yeah,
and there's like a night and day difference in terms of um,
yeah,
the degree of melodic presentation within that band. And you think
right.
it's you mentioned In Flames like that. Um, you can hear a little bit of that Gothenburg sound, like it, but it was very much like to my ears, they potentially, it's their first album, so they were probably younger musicians
Oh,
coming out
sure.
and
Yep.
writing that record. They probably had spent their like teenage years in my opinion, listening to that Gothenburg sound, but wanted to
Yeah.
sort of up the technical playing.
And I noticed I I looked at where they were from. I noticed it wasn't Gothenburg, so I'm not sure if it was close by. If they lived
Right.
close close by that scene or even the Stockholm scene. I'm not sure about that, but it's definitely there underlying
Right.
throughout. But yeah, that there's a yeah. I mean that is, especially the song "Let the Heavens Hate." The melody on there just really gets in your head, and it's not just like the same. They mix it up a little bit where they'll they'll play it really fast. Maybe they'll slow it down a little bit or change it up. Also, I didn't. I didn't hear. I felt like instead of like a lot of like solos, instead they just used melody to kind of bridge the
Sure.
gap.
There's a couple of moments. I think you mentioned so. Let the heavens Hayden, the third track under Azure Skies,
Yeah,
where it's the song completely empties out, right? Like
yeah,
they go
yeah,
through
yeah.
these very sort of challenging sort of riff moments, and then they'll come empty out, and you get like a clean. There's also these weird sort of like background synth, right? It's weird sort of moments where it gives a different kind of like emotional tenor
Yeah,
that
yeah,
adds
yeah.
a lot of quality, and then that lasts for whatever a handful of bars before they jump back into it. But I think it was that kind of approach to melody when I heard them that separated them from like a lot of the Gothenburg sound.
Yeah.
They don't have the same kind of like uh, structured or scaffold sort of melodic part that goes along with the death metal sort of groove in the
Right.
main.
Yeah, definitely more extreme for sure. Um, and technical. I mean, they they know how to play their instruments.
Um, any like I mean outside of that, uh, any thoughts in terms of this is an era that is not known for its amazing artwork, or you know what I mean? Like the you go from these like gorgeous paintings, all incredible artwork that happens in the early sort of formative years of death metal, and then we have we'll get into artwork later, but
Oh yeah.
but this is also the era of like all sorts of weird computer graphics and
Yes.
them playing around with it. So um, I don't think this Anata album is egregious, right? It's not like terrible, but
Yeah.
it's also
Is
not.
this the original?
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is okay. I didn't know if this is a reissue or if they changed it up. I do know that this is extremely hard to find, so I'm
yeah.
sure you will want this sent back to you because
It
if
did
you
it
look
did
on
get a
Discog.
vinyl. It did get a vinyl
Oh, did
pressing.
it?
Yeah, recently. So if you are
Um,
interested,
really?
yes.
From Season of Mist?
I don't know who
Well,
reissued it. Hold on a second. Let me
well,
talk to
I will definitely watch out for that.
Chaos Cult.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, there was that photo, not even Photoshop, like that desktop publisher kind of crap going on in the early 2000s. I mean, you could have a whole top 10 of just the
Sure.
worst.
Like, it is
Sure.
the hardest thing for
Yeah.
me. Like, and it's to some extent, like, it's like loving a terrible movie for how bad it is, you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I have the same kind of relationship with a lot of 2000s metal art,
Yeah.
just because it's such, like, an incredible fall from grace, and,
Like, well,
uh
you couldn't find anyone to do you a better cover. Like, where was Seagrave?
right, right.
You can't be that busy during this time period.
Are they just running in the opposite direction? I don't know what happened, but, nevertheless, I don't think it's too bad there, but
No, no, no. The subject matter, um, very, very anti-Christian, which is a little bit different than a lot of the other. That just didn't seem to be the focal point of a lot of this music back then. It was just more about violence and gore and
sure.
stuff like that. So that part of this kind of makes it stand out. You
Right.
know,
You could tell, I mean, there's a level of like abstraction and philosophy and so on and so forth that I'm not surprised they get sort of grouped into, technical death metal by extension, right?
Yeah,
Like, okay, they're a little bit headier, you know what I mean? Like they were probably paying attention to the latter death records or Cynic or whatever,
right.
not just because of their, proficiency, but also probably wanting to write about something that was different.
Yeah.
Um, what's interesting though is like it they stayed this course because Sweden, you know, and for me, a cabinet from Spawn of Possession, which I think comes out a couple years after this, um, they're like milling around. There's some other, Swedish technical brutal, death metal bands that are sort of on the verge of, coming out, and they sound, to me, far more challenging and technical, and
Yes.
in a way that this record feels a little bit more approachable. Like if I was between the melodic components, it's a
Yep.
nice sort of bridge piece between the melodeath, the
Hmm.
best melodeath era,
Yeah.
and and the technical death metal that's on its way essentially in the years to come.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I'd agree. It's definitely easier to wrap your head around um, than, yeah, like you said, some of that Spawn Obsession stuff, which is great. And you mentioned
Sure.
Cabinet, and I love Cabinet, um, but definitely a little bit easier for someone just kind of getting into it.
Right.
A good starting point, I would say.
Like if you hand someone like Just a Race and then you're like, okay, what am I gonna listen to after
Yeah,
this? This is not a little step,
yeah, but it's in the right direction for sure.
Okay. Um, anything else that you wanna final thoughts you wanna, contribute to that one before we move on to
Um, so you mentioned, are they still active?
they're not.
They're not. So,
Yeah.
but they had like 3 or 4 after this?
Yeah, I think they had 4 full lengths. I'm here on the Metal Archives here, I'll
Okay.
check for you. Um,
I remember, listening to the second one. I think it's got like a light
yeah,
light
so
blue cover.
fairly, prolific but short-lived. So it has them listed in as active, but, I mean, they haven't put out anything since 2006.
Gotcha.
So, for what it's worth. But and for the most part, like, I think if you liked their first one, and given the reaches of where your interests lie within the genre, there's nothing that's gonna come around that's gonna offend you.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways technical death metal, like for example, I don't own any Obscura or Necrophagist, and
You know
it's
what? I don't either.
and I just can't, like, maybe one day I will get that urge to go down that road, but,
Yeah.
there are other bands that for me, like Anata is a good example, where, like, I can go so far and before it reaches a tipping point that there's no point of return. I can't do it, Um, and, for
I was
some
still No, go ahead.
for some people that's probably further than they would like to go, but, it's I think they're a great band that sort of walks that line for me. Um, so
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm on the same page as far as those 2 bands that you mentioned, Obscura, both Obscura and Necrophagist. They just always, I'm sure I've heard some of their stuff, and it just kinda maybe just went over my head, or it was too clean, or it was too, I don't know, redundant,
I know
there was just, I'm not, I haven't spent enough time, but I kinda remember that was my thought, like, it wasn't anything that interested me at the time.
and because there are bands from the German scene in that from this area that I really like.
Yeah.
And I know we're kind of splitting hairs here. So for someone who's like, why do you like Defeated Sanity but hate Necrophagist? Like, you know what I mean? But that is absolutely true.
Yeah, you know, that's I yeah, and I'm into Defeated Sanity.
Okay,
I don't
so
know, I can't describe, I can't tell you why I like one and don't like the other, because I know it's all kind of the same stew, but there is just something different about, and I know people talk about Necrophagist all the time, as a favorite, and they just never really appealed to me.
Like, I think in an important band, right? But,
Yeah,
um, in a lot of ways, I just never made that leap, so, um, and it tended to go into other bands that were sort of, undiscovered or
mhm,
probably, in my opinion, worked well for me.
right.
Which let's go into one of the albums that you sent me here. So I'll blow this up. Um, and maybe if I ever do a Polish cut your teeth, I may have to loop you in for that because I know. Um,
There's a ton. Like the
yeah,
Polish scene was just stocked with talent. I think the first one, I mean, no question. Well, Vader. I mean, going back to Vader. Okay, Vader was kind of the old school, the classic.
right.
But when you get into like, geez, I don't even remember what year it was. Must have been. I wrote it down. No, I thought I wrote it down. Anyway, um, this one, yeah, 2000, Decapitated Winds of Creation. I
Class.
mean, this thing is a absolute beast by a bunch of like just kids.
Right.
Um, and when I heard this, it just blew me away. Um, they don't sound like this necessarily anymore, but this album is a absolute Polish gem. And it just seems like if it's not Vader or Decapitated, it just doesn't. It never. Nothing else really got that much press or attention, other than like Behemoth maybe, but they're not really in the
Sure.
same vein, but there I think there are just a ton of underrated, underappreciated Polish death metal bands from this era, from this period.
Okay, so we're going to talk about one of them here, and that is Yattering. So, I mean, we're gonna we're gonna get into the album artwork here in a second because I
Yeah,
got.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, my goodness. Um, but
It was
Murder Concept, um,
2000.
2000,
Yeah.
and this is a relapse. So Season of Mist, I think, sent this out, or
Hmm.
and Relapse did the distribution here in the states.
Hmm.
But uh, Gathering is, I mean, they're like, if you want to say that, Vader, I think Lost Soul is an early,
Yeah.
band from Poland that probably deserves to be mentioned. Um,
I
and
almost picked that one. I
uh,
almost picked Scream of the Morning Star, but I went with Yattering instead.
yeah, and well,
I only want to do one Polish band, so I was like,
we
Yattering's too much fun to ignore.
we can save the collection. We can save the collection for the deep dive. If we do a cut your teeth Polish episode, instead of me, just going through the stuff that I want to talk about,
Oh
we'll
yeah.
bring you in and spend a few hours diving into it. But yeah, I mean, they're a very important band, and to some degree, I think share a lot of the baggage that a band like Decapitated also has in terms of like having this important sort of formative, contribution to the country and the genre, and then the subsequent albums that came after sort of derailed their career and how people remember them.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so, because you can say a lot,
That's a good way to put it, for
yeah.
sure.
Uh, so, because I had, just so you know, do you own? This is Human's Pain from '98.
I do not have that one, but it is on my list because I think it's excellent.
Yeah, it is. It's killer. I really like this one, and to some degree, you recognize the same band, and they're taking new. Well, kind of the songwriting here, like there's little hints of their experimental nature on Human's Pain, um, but Polish death metal, I think, reminds me a little bit of Finnish death metal. Is it's like some of the most either this is a bit more technical. I think when people think Finnish death metal, they think like heavy, punishing stuff. but there's
weird
always this, yeah,
external. Mhm.
they're both kind of, there's a weird
Yeah.
personality trait both countries share. Like, and I don't know if it's my American ears or just like predilection to what I expect death metal to be,
Mhm.
but there's like, I mean, I don't know how I would describe it. It's like when you put something weird into a meal. Like I remember uh, traveling when I was in South Korea, and they had pickles with their pizza, and I was like, I was like, why? Who came up with this? Like, it is such an odd combination to me. Like,
Well,
how does this make sense to you? You know what I mean? And I
who came up with this and who thought it was a good idea? And then people tried it and liked it. Or maybe a more local example for you, Skyline Chili.
okay.
Like, you have Skyline Chili around
I've
you?
never been to Skyline Chili,
Okay.
but okay.
But,
Do you wanna fill me in on the culinary treat that I'm missing?
oh, man. Like, people would talk about Skyline Chili, like, who lived in Cincinnati, but like, "Okay, well, I gotta try it." And I finally made it down there. I'm like, "This is terrible. Why would you put cinnamon in your chili? It doesn't taste good." That's what it is. It's just cinnamon. It's like a sweet cinnamon
Okay.
chili. It
It's an
doesn't work for me.
odd choice.
But hey,
Okay.
whatever you're into.
But I kept on thinking about, like, how do I phrase this? Because that's kinda a little bit of what Yattering has going on. Now, later on in their career, they kind of ran into this trip hop, you know, uh, kinda sound, which you start to hear more of that on Murder's Concept.
Yeah.
There's some interesting sort of, like, ambient, industrial, electronic, hints in this record. Um,
They're
so
they come here and there. They're not overwhelming. You
right.
just maybe in a vocal effect or like you said, maybe an ambient passage.
Human brain, not torn apart. One must raise suffering. This is the game.
It's an odd sort of convergence because the other side of this is, we talk by comparison to Anata, and we were talking about the melodic, you
Yep.
know, contribution to that record. This is, you know, 500 miles per hour at times, incredibly challenging. Like it's one of those bands, whether you as a musician can completely appreciate it, mileage may vary, but to probably witness it live has got to be something to really sort of enjoy. But still a kind of a brutal band. I mean, I would say that very much in a Polish sound. So if you are familiar with what Poland sort of started to become around this time period, it's right on point with expectations. Uh, the now it shares this version, this relapse shares a different sort of track listing than the original that was released. So, but I kind of went through and I love the first track. So the art of the 20th century.
Oh,
Now, I think they did that. I can't be sure, but I think they did that just because the original pressing. I think they also included in the second track that was originally released on Season of Mist. Um, I forget early on, but they have anal necrotic.
oh, anal narcotic. Oh,
Narcotic,
yeah,
yeah.
I see. Yeah, I see what you're saying now.
And I don't know if they switched it around because they were like, "Oh man, I don't know if we want to introduce that song so quick." but
Uh,
yeah, it. I mean, there are times when it does get a little bit more mid-paced, where you can sink your teeth into something.
yeah,
The Murderer, the second track here, I definitely got that vibe.
a lot of groove. It's got some of that, chugginess to it.
Right, which is more present on Human's Pain. So you
Yeah,
can tell they probably wanted to take more risks, on their second
Mhm.
release. So it makes sense that they're sort of pushing the envelope in terms of technical proficiency and also like peripheral influences, right? With the ambient sort of drone electronic thing. Um, but yeah, I don't know. When you think about this record, like, what are your sort of initial sort of memories, or anything that you sort of want to add to that?
This is the first one I heard, and I think I just, that there's something about a band's name, and Yattering was one that was like, what does that even mean? And I later found out. I think it was like maybe a Clive Barker story or something like that. But it was just so interesting, and so that's kind of what drew me to check them out way back, in 2001. Um, but yeah, they seem to like have this really like chaotic blend of flirting death metal, which I was a huge fan of, but then kind of that like Meshuggah slash Gorguts kind of weirdness and time signatures and the kind of the chaos of cryptopsy, and maybe at times it's they got the really the gutturals and then the screams, almost like like maybe I was listening to Dillinger Escape Plan a lot during that time too. Just that, and I'm not trying to like compare them to
Sure.
Dillinger, so
Sure.
that much,
If
but
you show
I'm
up to
saying
this record
chaos.
looking for Dillinger, you're gonna be caught off
Yeah,
guard.
no, but I mean just that, just spastic, crazy start stop tempo changes, hyperactive. Well, there's some groove in there. Every track's going to give you a little something different, and it's going to keep you on the edge of your seat. Um, that's what I'll say. My first impressions were.
Sure. And that's probably a good point. Like, I think for a lot of people who were getting into heavier music at the time, like, I liked the chaos of some of the more, I don't know if you wanna say call it like math metal or whatever,
Yes,
um, but that sort of like challenging syncopation, right? Like, that's something
right.
that people associate with Meshuggah. This is like has elements of that, but through sort of a death metal filter, right?
There's still a ton of brutality.
Right.
Um, the drumming on this is really impressive, and I think this drummer filled in for Vader on some tours.
Right.
There's a really cool like drum fill part in the song. I think it's called Pleasure.
Yeah.
That's just out of this world. Um, yeah, he just goes nuts. The riff kind of slows down, and he just goes on a rampage.
And that's something that also,
Really
like,
cool.
Vader also had usually, they had tremendous drumming as well. So
Yeah,
I think a lot of the Polish death metal bands, it's something that it's a hallmark of the,
yeah.
um,
But you did bring up that trip hop album that they put out. Well, I think what doing a little background research on this band, it seemed like maybe they had a little falling out with the Season of Mist label for whatever reason. They still owed them an album. They went in the studio and they put out, you know, uh, or recorded what they would title 3,
right.
and it is an absolute weird um, kind of industrial techno electronic. You mentioned trip hop.
Right.
It's got a little bit of like metal in it, and I actually kind of like it. It's weird. It's like because the first music I really got into was like West Coast like gangster rap, like Ice Cube and Ice
True.
T and NWA. Like that was like in junior high what I was into.
Brian Arkham
So
and the Chronic.
yeah, the Chronic.
Yeah.
That was huge for me. So like I'm like listen to this um later Yattering stuff. I'm like, it's so different, but I don't know, I kind of like it. But no, I did totally. I think Season of Mist said no, we're not putting that out. I guess maybe they dropped them, and then they recorded the final album, Genocide. But I think they released them in reverse order.
Right.
Like they were released Genocide before 3 or Candlelight did. I'm not sure who released the Trip Hop album 3, but anyway, and I think yeah, that kind of put a I don't know. It put a stigma on them.
Right. Right. It's like,
It's totally it's like Morbid Angel when they put out that I album. I mean, they've never really gotten past it, have they? They've been marked.
right.
Yeah,
Right. I think people just don't talk about it. They just
yeah,
avoid.
yeah.
Um, V, can we now that we've
Okay.
praised their contribution in Polish death metal, can
Yeah.
we please talk about so like this album artwork? I don't. I'm actually going to cover that.
Yeah, you better cover it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it's
We have a baby in a like hellscape
yeah,
holding on to a skull. Let me see. I'll make myself big here.
more like a toddler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, excuse me. How dare I? But I
He's
mean,
walking. Probably still in diapers, yet not wearing a diaper.
okay. Well, I will. Given between the two of us, that you are the parent here, I will leave it up to you to make the. This is part of natural development of a child's life.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
Okay. But I mean, I don't know what they're
weird.
thinking here. Weird. Yes.
Very weird. And not only weird, it's like that just kind of awful cut and paste computer generated CGI
The glowing
artwork.
eyes, like if I can, I mean that adds a whole new dimension to it. I
It's,
really, wow.
yeah, I mean it's totally weird.
It is so special.
It's totally weird.
It is so strange. I think now it goes along, lyrical sort of concepts here. Like you mentioned, it's definitely a bit more on the gore side of things,
Mhm.
but um, it's with the album starting with the art of the 20th century. If you go through the lyrics, right, I don't think English is their first language. I think that's a first something we should mention here.
Which is one of kind of the things that you will notice in a lot of Polish death metal. They give it their best shot, but English is not their
Right.
first language. So there's going to be a little bit that's lost in translation.
Yes. But I mean, it seems to be talking about like a generation sort of society is ruining the youth through its, grievances and failures and sins and shortcomings. So, um, and here it comes on the end of the, beginning of the 21st century. So I guess it makes sense to kind of say like, hey, we as a world are screwed and we are ruining our children through a gore sort of
Mhm.
lens. But I don't know if people really tune into these albums for the lyrical concepts as much as um, for the instrumental side of things. But uh, I also don't want to breeze over that aspect of the albums because I think it's part of the experimentation process for a lot of bands. They're trying to go further in terms of whatever violence, gore, etc.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they're trying to instrumentally push things a little bit too. It ends up just being absurd sometimes. Definitely can be offensive. Um,
Yep.
but it's also just part of the world that they were living at the time. So it became par for the course.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You bring up like the lyrical con concepts because a lot of the stuff, like I said, I had on CDR. I wasn't really. It was. It was. I was focused on the music because I didn't have, the lyric sheet to follow along with. Where before, I would sit in my bedroom and I would flip through and I would listen and read along, and everything changed. When I started just hitting Napster, and it was all just in a file folder on my PC or on my on a CDR in my little CD binder in my car. Something like this, like
Right.
the album art is something I probably saw, but for the most part, it was just written, Yattering. But
Sure.
it until I purchased it recently, in the last couple of years. Um, it wasn't something I was going to be um, exploring that much
Right.
because the way I was listening to music changed
Right. Yeah.
during the early 2000s.
Change sort of the experience once you got a physical copy of something.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And you're able to kind of connect those dots and dig deeper into what their message was. And you brought up them playing live. I do know that I think they did a U.S. or played live in the U.S. maybe with Angel Corpse at one point. I know
Yeah.
Gene Pablecki. Um, he actually made a comment on one of their um, live videos, like that he played with them, and they were amazing, which is pretty high praise coming from him. And I think there is a full live show, or maybe it's even like a live DVD that's on YouTube. Yeah, I think it's called Creative Chaos, um, where
Oh,
they
wow.
play a lot of songs off of their first two albums, and it's really good. Seeing them, it's like professionally done. It's not like a grainy, handheld. It's like a
Right.
professionally done live recording of a show. So um, definitely worth the time to check out if you're interested in
Sweet.
mattering.
Okay. Well, and I mean, I'm ready to let go of Yattering unless you have any final
No,
comments. Okay. Um,
that was cool.
okay. So what we'll do now here is, uh, like I said in the beginning, if you missed it, I did send Brian 3 CDs. So he's got 2 more to choose from. He sent me 3, so I've got one that I want to go for next. And while he's making up his mind, um, this is Severed Savior, Brutality's Law. Um, only 2 full lengths, I believe they
Yep,
released.
that one and Servile Insurrection, I think was the other one.
Yeah.
I think that's what it's called.
And here we
Okay.
have a unique leader,
Yep.
band, incredibly important to the California tech death scene. Um, and this is their first one, so we'll get a chance to kind of explore the. Here we had 2 international, a Swedish and a Polish contribution, so this will be a glimpse into America at the time. We'll jump into
Yes.
that, and I will. So this will be my pick for our next one. What you got, Brian?
Okay, let's go with you might have to help me with the pronunciation. Gurkhas?
Yeah, I believe it's their. I'll let things good for me. Gurkhas.
Yep. A Life of Suffering. Germany. Although I don't know, is the band German?
Believe they are French.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Have you heard of that one before?
No. So of the three you sent me, I had heard of Anata. The other two were totally foreign to me.
Okay. And you did get a chance to spin them?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Listened to both once or twice through, but that was I think when I first got them.
Okay. I'm really excited for you to listen to that one. Reason being, it's a short-lived project. I dig a lot.
Cool.
French death metal from this. It's not a well discussed or often off discussed region for death metal. So
Yeah, absolutely.
um, sweet. So
That's
we
true.
got our picks for next time, and just want to say thank you, Brian, uh, for doing this. Um, so I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add before. I don't know when this next video will be.
This
Uh,
this one was kind of a long time
a
in the making.
long time coming. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
Brian is really venturing out here into no man's land. This is my first time experimenting with any kind of streaming service or whatever. So
yeah. But
yeah,
thanks for, I mean, you always bring some of the best topical questions, you know, to your videos. And so this series in particular was one that really resonated with me and made me dig deeper into this time period of this genre, and even go back and try and find stuff um, that I had totally missed out on. Well, here's one. Here's one you showed in one of your videos. I'm not sure which one it was. Maybe the
is
first or
that the
second one.
howitzer?
Yeah. Um, Rage Inside the Womb. So you talked about this one, and I checked it out, and it rages. So
Yeah,
my local shop had this sitting there for for years. I'd always pass by it and be like, eh.
sure.
But yeah, this one's awesome. So thank you for pointing me onto this, and I gave it a happy home with me instead of
Yeah,
sitting in the bin. But there's been other ones, like I've just been kind of you know checking out other like bands from France. I'm discovering that were in that time period. Um, that was kind of, at least for me, I really think like Opeth and Catatonia and stuff like Lacuna Coil and In Flames were just kind of, they were the big things. They were that's what was getting all the attention
right.
in the early 2000s and beyond. And a lot of the stuff just seemed to get kind of glossed over. And
Right.
I don't know how much like bands like Deeds of Flesh toured back in the day, or if Severed Savior toured, but it's cool to look back and re-listen to these, a lot of the stuff that I just kind of had
Right.
in a folder on my computer for so long. A lot of the stuff you can find relatively cheap. Some
Right.
not so much. Like we talked about Spawn of Possessions Cabinet. That one's pretty hard to find.
Yeah.
That's like a
I mean,
that's
that's a record I would love to get on vinyl, but I mean,
oh yeah.
I don't know how this, in 2001, how many were released. Last time I checked, the record's going for hundreds of dollars. Same thing for
The
like the
CD.
Creation,
Which
uh,
one?
the Decapitated, the Winds of Creation.
Oh yes.
That one's, I mean, I did not get a lot of pressing. So they're, in they're classic records that are in
Yeah.
dire need of a reissue. Um, but a part of me is like, as much as I am committed to this generation, I kind of feel like, man, if there's a record to go all in, and buy, it's one of them. But I just can't
I
bring
know.
myself to do that. So maybe one day, but we'll
Or
see.
maybe it'll just get reissued and it'll be $20 in a few years.
Sure.
I feel like anytime I spend the money on something
Yeah,
within a few months or within a year, it gets reissued.
you're just
It never
cursed now.
fails. So I'm gonna hold off, and maybe
Huh.
Cabinet will come our way one of these days, because it's great. It
Right.
really is.
Uh,
I don't know. I don't know what. I still don't really understand the title, but that's okay.
no, no, but Yattering, we
Yep.
don't know.
Yeah. We'll just accept it.
Yes. Cool. Well, I promise there won't be quite as long of a gap in time. I want to get these done so soon enough, but I'll probably now I got my kind of feet wet here in the streaming stuff. It'll
Yeah.
be less of an obstacle next time around. So,
Yes.
um, and I want to make sure that I get your CDs back to you. Um,
Well,
I just don't live with them forever. So,
yeah, me too. Because I know this one. This one is of the three.
right,
This one is a sought after item.
yeah,
But thanks for
awesome.
bringing me along for the ride. This is really fun
Okay,
to do these collaborations.
we'll do it again here soon, Brian.
Yeah, sooner than later.
Okay, cool. See you later.
Bye.